to Chalk Talk, the Pro Football Focus DFS podcast. I am your host, Scott Barrett, and manning the co-pilot seat is DFS wonderkind himself, Tyler Buecher. What's going on, Tyler?
Scott, how is it going? How was your week one?
It's pretty good. I lost about 20% on DraftKings, but at least tripled up on both Yahoo and FanDuel. What about you?
Cash games were a major success. Got like 91.3% return there. GPPs made a little bit of money, but then threw it all back on Monday night.
Yeah, so I had a pretty good week, but it could have been a lot bigger. Three of the guys I was highest on at the end of the week were Amari Cooper, Larry Fitzgerald, and Terrell Pryor. As you know, I created a stat called Actual Opportunity at an article looking back at the guys who ranked highest by this stat. It came out a few days ago. Basically what it does is it looks at a player's expected fantasy points based on their volume. And those three guys all ranked top 5 at the position in expected fantasy points. They saw a lot of targets, plenty of high-value targets near the end zone, plenty of deep balls, but all three disappointed. I nailed the cornerback matchups on each. Pryor saw most of his targets against Jalen Mills, our worst-graded cornerback last season. Fitzgerald saw most of his on Quandre Diggs, one of our 20 worst-graded cornerbacks last season. And Amari Cooper saw most of his on Adoree Jackson. He's a super raw rookie cornerback. So what went wrong? Diggs had the highest-graded game of his career, played lights out. Jalen Mills was still terrible. He allowed the second most yards of the week, but Pryor couldn't do anything against him for whatever reason. Each wide receiver dropped at least one end zone target. That's 18 points right there. Cooper had 4 total drops in the game after dropping only 5 passes last season. Pryor and Cooper both ranked among our 12 worst graded wide receivers for the week. And you can look at running backs too. Some of the guys we were on David Johnson. We were on LaShawn McCoy. Both of those guys got injured on the within the 5-yard line, and their backup came in and vultured the touchdown. So these just small, minute kind of things, like, if he just caught that pass, if he didn't injure his wrist, he just stayed on to take that goal line carry, could have resulted in crazy swings in fantasy productivity. And on the whole, this is a super down week for fantasy scoring. I think like 4 defenses ranked in the top 12 among flex positions and fantasy points is incredible, really. But football, you have to remember, is a game with a lot of week-to-week variance. So much can change. Sure, Tyler Eifert stunk last week. Tariq Cohen was great. But that doesn't mean that's the most likely outcome for each player in week two. Definitely do not weigh too much what happened last week. It's just a one-game sample size versus, we still had 16 games of last season. So don't go too heavy on what happened in week 1. That's my takeaway. What would yours be, Tyler, if you had one?
No, I think you nailed it there. Variance happens week to week, play to play. Like, it's something that we can't control. It's just an outcome of the game. One thing that I think we should do going forward is not only look at the week 1 results, but we should weigh 2016's results a little bit more heavily until we get a little bit more of a sample size in 2017. I'll probably be doing that with most of my analysis for the next 2 to 3 weeks. Around week 4 is when I think we can jump right into the 2017 stats. It was a really tough week, though, for variance, and a lot of the studs at running back fell victim to it.
I think Football Guys writer Adam Harstad has a great article from maybe a few years ago, but always stuck with me. He did some studies and he found out that it's not until week 6 of a season that season matters more than the prior season. So I always thought that was interesting. So, maybe we can gain an edge by fading some players who went off in week 1 and attacking guys who disappointed, who we might get at a low ownership. With that in mind, Tyler, let's talk about some of the top plays at the quarterback position.
Yeah, there's a ton. Looking at DraftKings specifically, all 4 of their top guys are priced in the highest scoring games of the week. The Patriots versus the Saints and the Packers versus the Falcons. I think all four of those guys are options for cash and for GPPs. They all have incredible ceilings. One of my favorite plays is probably Matt Ryan playing at home against Green Bay. They've got a 53.5 game total, and there's a lot to like with him. Ryan is the QB5 on FanDuel, the QB3 on DraftKings. Since the Julio Jones era began in 2011, Ryan has 17 home games with 300 yards passing. That's at 3-point bonus on DK. That's sixth most in the league. He has 29 multi-passing TDs at home. That's fourth most in the league. And the last three times that he's played the Packers over the last 3 years, he's scored 43, 24.4, and 35.3 fantasy points on DK. Ryan Julio stacks were my most used stacks last year, and I'm going to plan on using them again starting here in week 2.
Yeah, so I think you hit the nail on the head. And this is kind of a theme throughout this entire week, for me at least, is that, I love everyone in the New Orleans Saints versus New England Patriots game, and I love everyone in the Atlanta Falcons versus Green Bay Packers game, but so does Vegas. Vegas has it as the two top games by a landslide, and you have to figure these guys are going to come in at very high ownership. Everyone else has the same idea in mind, game stack the hell out of these two games. Definitely, they're all fantastic options this week. Could be close, high-scoring shootouts with tons of fantasy potential. I think if I were to go that route, if I were to have, let's say, do a New England, New Orleans game stack. If I had Brady, I might consider maybe dub stacking him and then grabbing Adrian Peterson. Or if I had Drew Brees, I might consider grabbing Mike Gillislee, just to give you more upside in your lineup rather than chasing multiple receiving options on both teams. But outside of that, there's really only two quarterbacks I especially like. One I know you're with me on. The other I know we're going to have a disagreement. I am on Russell Wilson against the 49ers. He's my top quarterback right after some of the guys in those previously mentioned matchups. And Phillip Rivers. What do you think, Tyler?
You're right. I'm going to have to disagree with you on Russ. Last year, the offensive line for the Seattle Seahawks allowed a pressure on 41.6% of Wilson's dropbacks. Week 1 saw 39.4%, basically the same exact thing. And we saw it really hold back his potential. And this offense as a whole, I think they looked really terrible against that Green Bay front seven, and Mike Daniels just had a field day. I don't think that'll really improve against San Francisco's defensive line, which is just laden with first-round picks. And we've seen over the course of the last 3 years, Russell Wilson has scored less than 17 DraftKings points in 5 of 6 contests against the 49ers. He's thrown multiple touchdowns against them just once in that span. Sell me on Russ, because I don't see it.
So I agree with you. The offensive line is a huge concern for Wilson, but I do not think it's a concern this week. San Francisco totaled the third fewest pressures last week, despite a fairly attractive matchup. The ranked sixth worst in pressures per game last season. He's only the sixth highest priced quarterback on both sites. You should get him at low ownership after a dud in a really strong matchup last week against the Green Bay Packers. But again, this 49ers front line I don't think is near as good as the Green Bay Packers. I think you mentioned that he struggled last season against the 49ers, which is true. But the game before that, he scored 25.4 points. I'm kind of throwing out all of 2016 when he played hurt with a knee brace from week 4 until the playoffs. He lost about 2.0 rushing fantasy points per game from his career average, which would have made up the difference between him finishing 14th and 5th among quarterbacks in fantasy scoring. Vegas loves this game. I do as well. I think I could definitely see him exploding. I like Doug Baldwin up against a slot cornerback who sat out all of last year because he couldn't pass a physical and was bad the year before that. He has 10 receptions, 208 yards, and touchdowns in 2 games against them last year. Jimmy Graham has 10 receptions, 164 yards, and a touchdown. So I like both of those guys as stacking options.
I think what I'm concerned about with Russ is the ceiling. Like I said, we haven't seen him throw multiple touchdowns against them in 5 of his last 6 games. And on a week where there's so many great quarterback spots, I think it's very difficult to justify paying 6,800 when you could pay a couple hundred more and get Aaron Rodgers at 7,400, or a little more at 7,500 and get Matt Ryan. If I'm gonna go cheap, I'm gonna go to a guy like Phillip Rivers. I think he's the nuts here at 6,000 on draft. I'm sorry, at 5,800 on DraftKings. I really like him in this spot if you're trying to save money. He's coming off a 3-touchdown game against the top pass defense in the league, the Broncos. He'll get a considerably easier matchup at home against the Dolphins. Miami allowed the 6th most passing touchdowns and 4th most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks last season. 8 of their 16 opponents scored at least 20 DK points against Miami last year, and 4 of those scored at least 30. Keenan Allen looked phenomenal in his season 1 opener, hurdling a defender and then jumping into another one for a score. Tyrell Williams went off against Miami last year, went for 5 catches, 125, and a touchdown. Another 3-touchdown game is certainly a possibility for Rivers, and they're 4.5 home favorites, and I think he just offers massive savings of trying to differentiate your lineups from the stud quarterbacks in those shootouts.
Yeah, I'm absolutely with you on this one. Miami's secondary is a big concern. Cornerbacks Xavier Howard and Bobby McCain were 2 of our 20 worst rated cornerbacks last season, and both are likely to start nickel packages. Byron Maxwell ranked 19th best last season, but has apparently played so poorly in preseason that his roster spot was in jeopardy. I'm betting on a big game for Rivers, as well as bounce back games for Keenan Allen and Tyrell Williams.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. The joke for Byron Maxwell among Philadelphia fans is just a picture of him as burnt toast because he's just been terrible ever since leaving. I think that wraps up most of the quarterback plays that I'm interested in here. What do you like at the running back position? I think there's a lot of good plays given how they priced them this week.
I see 3 or 4, guys I'm salivating over. Then after that, it depends on how cute I want to get. But Ty Montgomery's the chalk, Ezekiel Elliott's the chalk, Le'Veon Bell's the chalk, especially if we might be able to get him at low ownership. And Melvin Gordon, who's proved himself to be a bell cow running back yet again, is up there as well.
Yeah, I'm going to have to agree with you. And one of our listeners had mentioned something on my Twitter feed about chalk and the negative connotation with it. Chalk isn't necessarily a bad thing. The reason why some of these plays become chalk is because they're in such great spots and have great opportunities to rack up fantasy points. The way for us to use that to our advantage is if we're tied with an opponent in a head-to-head, and we know, okay, say the opponent has $5,900 left in their running back spot. Safe money would probably say it's Ty Montgomery, who's priced at $5,800 on DK this week. If that were the case, that's when you use the chalk to your advantage and pivot to another play. But that being said, Ty Montgomery's in such a smash spot, unless you're in that 1-to-1 swap spot, there's really no need to fade him. I think Ty Montgomery is probably going to carry the heaviest ownership this week.
Yeah, Montgomery's really in a dream spot this week. The Falcons allowed 13 rushing fantasy points per game last year. It was only 17th most, but they led the league in receiving fantasy points per game to opposing running backs with 14.5, well above the next closest defense. In the postseason, we remember James White recorded 31 receiving fantasy points in the Super Bowl and arguably should have won the MVP award. Jordan Howard and Tariq Cohen combined for 23.1 receiving fantasy points last week. And it could have been 6 more at least had Howard not dropped an end zone target. Ty Montgomery, as we know, is a converted wide receiver to running back. Arguably, he's more effective in the pass than in the run. But last week was used as a bell cow. He played 74 of 82 snaps, totaled 19 of 21 carries, and drew all 4 of the team's running back targets. Really just looks like a dream spot for him. He disappointed the last time he played, but I remember he was forced to leave the game early with a rib injury.
Yeah, I think another important fact about Ty Montgomery was that he graded out as our best pass blocker in week 1, and that was against the Seattle front 7. That was a major concern about Tymo going into the year, whether or not he would warrant those pass down situations where they would be needed to be pass blocking. And Montgomery completely excelled there. Another thing that makes him a great spot here is just the fact that the Falcons allow such a amount of work in the receptions and receiving touchdown categories. They allowed the most in both of them last year. Tymo is just a smash play at 5,800.
Absolutely agree. What about Ezekiel Elliott, Tyler? I've talked to a few analysts inside the industry about this play, and for some reason, I knew you were on it from day one, but I've got some kickback on it, and I don't care. I'm going, I think, 100%. Tyler, you don't need to sell me, but sell our listeners on Ezekiel Elliott this week.
Yeah, last year the Broncos were one of the most egregious funnel defenses, and by that I mean they forced opposing offenses to run against them versus pass. They have tremendous corners in the secondary that the only way to beat the Broncos was to run on them. And as such, they allowed the third most rushing attempts and ninth most rushing yards. Zeke is a guy that can completely take advantage of that. He bailed out his fantasy success last week with 5 targets, which was something he did only once last year. If Dallas continues to utilize him in this capacity as a receiver, he's going to have an amazing ceiling this season, particularly on a site like DK. We saw 8.6 of his 22 points come from receiving work, and if he can tack that on to 20-plus rushes, he's going to be a cash game staple that's just going to replace DJ now going forward.
Yeah, I'm completely with you. If basically he gets the exact same matchup he had last week, where you have an elite slot corner, Chris Harris Jr. this time instead of Dominique Rodgers-Cromartie to shut down Cole Beasley. You have an elite outside corner in Aqib Talib. Last week it was Janoris Jenkins to shut down Dez Bryant, who's super cornerback sensitive, as we've talked about a few times on this show. So really their only other receiving options are Jason Witten and Terrence Williams like it was last week. The only difference is instead of facing a Giants defense that has a top 5 run defense, they're facing a Denver defense that has arguably a bottom 5 run defense. It just makes so much sense for them to eat up the clock, dominate time of possession, and just feed Ezekiel Elliott until he develops an eating disorder or can't wear his belly shirt anymore. But again, the big thing to me was in week 1, he set a career high in targets with 5 and a career high in routes run with 30. That's basically double what he averaged last season. And I wrote about this all off season. Elliott was amazing last season despite not seeing a really valuable workload. Not a lot of work inside the 5 just because he was so efficient from, outside of the 15-yard line. He was just running them in from there because that's how good he was. But also, like, in a PPR league especially, targets are so valuable. And in terms of expected fantasy points, he was getting dominated by David Johnson, Le'Veon Bell, despite his actual production looking better. If he gets that receiving workload too, he might just put up what we thought David Johnson would.
Yeah, I can't agree more. And he also comes with that fantastic offensive line. Yeah, they took some hits over the offseason, but they're still one of our top 10 lines graded at PFF. I think he has a chance to put up maybe the RB1. He'll contend with Bell, I'll just say that, considering that he has massive touchdown upside behind that line.
Tyler, what about Le'Veon Bell? Should we be nervous? He saw 16 opportunities last week, so that's carries plus targets, which is the 3rd lowest in any game of his career. Should we be concerned this week? Are they trying to ease him in because he missed all that time in training camp?
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if they were trying to do that. We saw last week that Bell played just 71% of the snaps, and that was the lowest snap share he's played in a full game since, I think it was 2014. I just think it's a complete outlier for Bell where he should be in a complete smash spot against the Vikings. We saw that the Saints had some success running the ball. They weren't completely impenetrable, and I think we could see Bell pick up a ton of receiving work out of the backfield as well. I don't know. I'm just not sold that week 1 is representative of what Bell's ceiling is.
Yeah, and I think the opportunity to get someone like Bell with that immense upside at a potentially low ownership could be huge for your tournament. So I like him a lot. I do like Ezekiel Elliott more, but he's right up there for me. Melvin Gordon as well. Do you have a? Also, I think the matchup kind of works to Bell's favor, where Minnesota has these elite shutdown cornerbacks. To be honest, Martavis Bryant looked a little rusty as he did this preseason as well. So we could see a game that lends itself to Roethlisberger needing that help underneath in Bell. But yeah, what about Melvin Gordon? Because he's up there with me, up there with Bell for me as well.
Yeah, I think Gordon's in a complete smash spot here. The Dolphins allowed the fourth most rushing yards last year. They gave up 90 total receptions to running backs, which was, I think it was sixth most. There's just a ton of ways for Gordon to rack up fantasy points. Yeah, and we're seeing Gordon also enter this game as a current 4.5 point home favorite. I really, really like Gordon in cash games and stacking him with the Chargers defense. That defensive line with Bosa and Melvin Ingram could create plenty of pressure, and they have great coverage cornerbacks in Casey Hayward and Jason Verrett that I think could force Jay Cutler into some poor mistakes. I think that's going to be one of the founding pieces of my cash games, Melvin Gordon and bringing it back with the Chargers defense. We've seen the two correlate very highly over the course of DraftKings history, and I think it's just a smash play. Go ahead.
I agree. Yeah, you crushed it. You hit the nail on the head. All offseason beat reporters were talking about how the Chargers wanted to limit Melvin Gordon's workload, but that did not appear to be the case at all. You saw 76% of the team's running back snaps, 82% of the carries, 67% of the targets. It's a little chalky and it's a little expensive this week for our running back plays, but that's how I feel about it. Unless you have anything else to add, do you want to move on to wide receivers?
Yeah, let's get to it. Wide receivers, who are your top plays?
Tyler, you know this. It's Julio Jones.
It is Julio. Julio is the nuts. He's at home playing against the Packers. Green Bay gave up the most fantasy points, receiving yards, and receiving touchdowns to opposing wide receivers last year. The last time Julio played the Packers, he went off for 9 catches, 180 yards, and 2 touchdowns, 42 DraftKings points. I'm revolving my cash game core around Julio as well. He's the stud I'm paying up for.
Yeah, he crushed last year in the playoffs, but in week 8, I believe it was, against the Packers last season, he only saw 29 yards on 5 targets. But remember, he was dealing with a significant injury at the time. I don't think he saw a single second half target in that game. And then the time he played the Packers before that, he saw 17 targets, 11 receptions, 259 yards, and a touchdown. Absolutely smashes them, at least in 2 of the past 3 games. Green Bay has probably the worst cornerback core in the league. Maybe the Eagles are a little bit worse, but it's at least close. They allowed the most fantasy points per game to outside wide receivers last season. All offseason, Atlanta's talked about how they want to get him more heavily involved in the red zone, which is huge for him because he's never been a high touchdown guy. He's just dominated in terms of yardage. So he's easily my top play this week. I know wide receivers can be a little inconsistent, but this one just feels like a layup. All right, Tyler, what other wide receivers are you on this week?
A guy that I think's a little bit at a discount that I'm interested in is Emmanuel Sanders. The Broncos love to move Sanders all over the formation. He'll draw matchups against almost all of the Cowboys' corners, and that's a good thing. Last year, Sanders ran 35% of his routes from the right, 24% from the slot, and 41% from the left. That means he'll get significant action against all 3 of the Cowboys' starting corners, starting with Nolan Carroll, who was our number 100 ranked cornerback last year. That he's going to play on the right side. Left side will be Anthony Brown, who is credited with allowing 5 touchdowns to opposing receivers last year. And slot cornerback Orlando Scandrick, may not even play for this one. He needs a metal plate inserted into his left hand, and if Skandrick were to miss time, Sanders will be lining up against their four-stringer who's forced to play in the slot. He's in a plus matchup no matter where offensive coordinator Mike McCoy lines him up. And I think he's going to have low ownership too this week after last week's poor performance. He still saw 6 targets, which is plenty cash game viable for me, a guy seeing that much volume, and he just missed out on scoring a touchdown. People that are just box score hunting aren't going to know that he just missed out on that touchdown opportunity. The Broncos are minor home dogs, and that being said, I think that'll force them to pass a little more. And we saw last year that Sanders and Demaryius Thomas saw the large majority of their targets. Over 50% was split between the two. So sorry for any Benny Fowler truthers out there, but it's just going to be Sanders and DT. I think they're both in play this week.
Yeah, so I agree. I think Dallas's cornerback core is really weak, especially with Skandrick out, or at least likely out. We saw them run a lot of cover 6 last week against Brandon Marshall and the Giants. Typically, that's a sign that a team does not trust their cornerbacks. My only issue is I think Dallas dominates time of possession to the point where it's going to be hard to rack up a lot of points and see a lot of targets against them. But yeah, I mean, I definitely don't hate it. It looks like a good spot for sure. I am on. I know he had a big game last week, and Adam Thielen looks like the dollar per opportunity value. But I like Diggs a lot this week. He has an A-plus matchup against the Cleveland Browns, and more specifically Joe Hayden. He ran 63% of his routes from right wide receiver last week. Joe Hayden lined up against right wide receiver 100% of the time last week. Over the past 3 seasons, 2014 to 2016, Joe Hayden ranks 3rd worst in opposing passer rating, 2nd worst in fantasy points per target, and worst in fantasy points per route. So he's been arguably one of the worst cornerbacks in the NFL over the past 3 seasons. Though there's this, people seem to think he's this amazing shutdown corner. I mean, even the Steelers think that, but the fact of the matter is, I know he's played hurt for a lot of this, but he's just struggled. And last week, he gave up the most yards of any cornerback. He was one of the most targeted cornerbacks. And William Gay, meanwhile, was one of our ranked in the top 5 in fantasy points allowed per route and coverage over this span. So he's been tough to score on, and that's who Adam Thielen should run the majority of his routes against. So just the cornerback matchup looks especially nice there. Another guy who draws an attractive cornerback matchup is Tyreek Hill. Eagles allowed the 2nd fewest fantasy points per game to tight ends last season. They held Jordan Reed to just 8.6 points on 8 targets. Philadelphia's defensive line is ferocious and really scary. They allowed just 34 yards rushing. So maybe it could be a tough game for Kareem Hunt if he's not as heavily involved in the passing game as he was last week. They also generated 19 pressures and 4 sacks. So maybe that we see some low ADOT manufactured touches for Tyreek. But most importantly, he's up against some bad cornerbacks. Patrick Robinson was our 32nd worst graded cornerback last year. Ronald Darby was average, but he's hurt and going to miss this game. Jalen Mills was our worst cornerback last year. Gave up the 2nd most yards last week, was one of the most, he was targeted 15 times in coverage last week. The next closest quarterback had 11. Even with Terrell Pryor playing terribly, as we mentioned before. So I could see a big game for him. Who are some other wide receivers you're on, Tyler?
Well, before I jump into that, I just love the 2 guys that you mentioned. I think the Vikings and Steelers game and the Chiefs-Eagles are 2 great ways to be a bit contrarian, with everybody focusing on these high-scoring games between the Saints and Patriots and the Packers and Falcons. The Eagles-Chiefs have the 3rd highest total, and the Vikings-Steelers have the 5th highest. I think it's a smart way to fade a lot of the chalk and target these receivers that are in great matchups, not just individually, but as a game total that will behoove them to keep throwing. Another guy that I'm interested in this week is Amari Cooper and Michael Crabtree. I think they're both going to be in smash spots against the Jets. The only question is another thing of volume. We don't know how often they're going to be passing. They are massive 13.5 home favorites against the Jets, which is kind of ludicrous. But I think they make for terrific game stacks. If you just want to go full Raiders onslaught, Derek Carr, Amari Cooper, Michael Crabtree, Marshawn Lynch, Raiders defense, like playing all five of those guys against the Jets, maybe bringing it back with some Jermaine Kearse, maybe bringing it back with Bilal Powell. I think it's a unique way to just go completely ham on a team that could score 40-plus points and limit their opponent to less than a touchdown.
Yeah, my only concern with that game is, I don't think Oakland really will need to try too hard to beat up on them. I think, the defense could do it themselves, and then what do you do with the running backs? Is Marshawn Lynch going to be your closer? Could it be a committee? So it's tough to really like one person in that game, but I'm with you. There's tons of potential. Another guy I am on this week is Chris Hogan. We were on him last week. Danny Amendola should be out. Draws a very soft cornerback matchup. The Saints allowed 9 receptions and 157 yards on 10 targets to slot receiver Adam Thielen last week. Hogan ran 64% of his routes from the slot last week, and that should climb with Amendola out. I also like Deshaun Jackson, who not a lot of people are talking about. Chicago has poor cornerbacks, but have historically shut down wide receiver ones over the last 2 seasons. Typically, they bring safety help over the top. Maybe that's Jarrell Adams sometimes as well, who just went down with an injury. So maybe this changes. Maybe they also think Deshaun Jackson is a formidable wide receiver too. But given this history, the sellout to stop a wide receiver one, that could be Mike Evans leaving Deshaun Jackson in a soft zone coverage he should beat. He's only the 37th highest priced wide receiver on DraftKings, though he always has a strong ceiling for tournaments. Was there any other wide receivers you wanted to mention, Tyler?
Yeah, just one last one was Marquise Lee. I think he's a great punt play at 3,800. We haven't talked too many about cheap guys, but Lee saw 7 targets in his last matchup against the Titans. We know Allen Robinson is going to be out for the year now, unfortunately. There aren't a lot of great receiving options, and to be frank, the quarterback option isn't great either, but the team will need to throw at some point, and Lee is a guy that I think could be in a great spot here. I don't know. I think Lee's an option if you're looking to go cheap.
I'm definitely with you. I think the Jaguars are not going to have the same game script they got against Tom Savage. This week they're against Marcus Mariota, so they could be more inclined to go at least a little bit more pass heavy this week. And Marcus Lee was quietly super efficient last season. On 43 fewer targets, Marquise Lee totaled 9 more yards from scrimmage than Allen Robinson in 2016. Fairly impressive numbers. Let's move back. Let's move on to tight ends this week. This is where it gets a little bit tricky, at least for me, because there's no one really up top I like. I just find myself continually paying down to the position for guys like Charles Clay, Zach Miller, maybe even Jesse James, who I felt was, kind of fluky his big 2-touchdown game last week, but could see him in a few lineups. But really, it's Charles Clay and Zach Miller for me, and that's on both sites. What do you think about those names?
I think you're onto something here. Seems like a week where we want to pay up for quarterback, pay down at tight end, and then find our spots in the middle there with wide receiver and running back. I don't really like any of the top 5 or so tight ends. I think they're all in poor matchups, and I don't think you're going to get enough bang for your buck if you want to play them. The one stud that I am somewhat interested in is Jimmy Graham at 4,900 on DraftKings. He went off for 6 catches, 100 yards, and 1 touchdown. Good for 24 DraftKings points. Last time Seattle played San Francisco at home. I mentioned I'm not super into Wilson, but I think Graham as a standalone piece is fine. Since joining Seattle in 2015, Graham has averaged 13.8 fantasy points at home, 9.3 away. 7 of his 8 touchdowns scored over the last 2 years have come at home. none of the studs are really in great spots. So I think if I'm gonna pay up for one, it's Graham. But Scott, you nailed it. I think the best way to go is cheap here at tight end. Which guys really draw your interest here?
Yeah, it's definitely the two I mentioned, Charles Clay and Zach Miller. We know, especially after losing Alshon Jeffrey, losing Cameron Meredith, losing Kevin White, the Chicago Bears team does not have really anyone attractive at the wide receiver position. Zach Miller seems to be that new primary receiving weapon, unless you think it's Tariq Cohen, but as I know we talked about before the show, you do not. Um, so I could see him getting a lot of targets, and he's just super cheap. Charles Clay as well. He amassed 60% of his team's wide receiver or tight end actual opportunity market share. That might sound crazy if you haven't read the article yet, but it just saw a lot of expected fantasy points and a high percentage of his team's expected fantasy points. That shouldn't be a surprise considering he's Tyrod Taylor's only returning starting receiver on this offense. He's hurt for a lot of the early part of last season, and this is a run-heavy team that doesn't get too many scoring opportunities, but Clay posted 22.6 fantasy points per game over the final 4 weeks of last season, scored over 15 points last week as well. So those are the guys I'm on. I'm going to go cheap with those two and feel pretty good about it.
If you want to go real cheap, I'll go even cheaper. What I love about DraftKings pricing is that they put the minimum for running backs and wide receivers at 3,000. Tight end, though, they put you down at 2,500. And a guy that I'm super interested in is Gerald Everett with the Rams. He only saw one target last week, but it went for 39 yards on a major bomb downfield. McVay's made a career of getting the most out of his tight ends. Everett was his first draft pick as a head coach. And while I'm not really expecting a monster stat line here, he's min-priced. It won't take much for him to get to 7.5 points at 3x value we talk about. Tyler Higbee's also on the roster. He saw 3 targets, catching 2 for 17. Very unimpressive. But he will be a roadblock. Higbee played 53 of 65 snaps. Everett was just there on 29 of 65. I really like Gerald Everett, though, as a punt, as Sean McVay's Jordan Reed 2.0. The Redskins gave up the second most receptions to tight ends last year. I wouldn't be shocked if McVay were to utilize his tight ends heavily against his former team.
I am not on that at all, and I want to make a little wager for you. I don't know if you're ready for this, but I will bet you that George Kittle, at minimum price, outscores Gerald Everett this week.
Deal.
All right. Well, we'll have to come up with something good. The loser will have to do something embarrassing on the show next week. But Kittle's my guy. Got some impressive usage. I think Everett. I love the talent. I love the talent, and I love the fit from a dynasty perspective. Still a little early for me on that. I think Higbee out targets him, out produces him. But Kittle's my guy, at least for week 2, up against a Seattle secondary that's much tougher against wide receivers than tight ends, but it's a lot of talk about rookie tight ends who probably aren't going to do much this week.
Yeah, these are 2% plays that we're talking here.
This is plays for just you and me and
Yeah.
no one else. Do you want to talk defenses this week? Defenses stole the show last week.
They did, and there's a ton in play here. I'm trying to think offhand. One team that I'm super into are the Raiders, 14-point home favorites against the Jets. We could see them score in a myriad of ways. The Jets' offensive line is terrible. The Raiders with Khalil Mack could get plenty of pressure, force them into turnovers. They're a guy I'm pretty interested in. I think they're like the 6th highest priced defense. What are you looking at?
Yeah, I think defense is still a little easy. It's just you can target decent defenses against atrocious quarterbacks, and that's Cincinnati. That is Seattle, of course, at home against San Francisco feels like a smash. That's Oakland against the Jets, like you said. I'm not ready to buy into Kaiser. I like Baltimore at home against him. maybe even Titans against Blake Bortles, though he probably shouldn't be asked to throw too much. And then, of course, Arizona versus the Colts.
Oh yeah, smash play. One under-owned play that I'm kind of interested in is Tampa Bay going against Chicago. We're going to see Tampa Bay play against their former quarterback with Mike Glennon. If there's any team that knows how to defend him, it's the team that's been playing against him in practice for years. I kind of think Mike Smith's defense here has a sneaky shot of forcing a couple turnovers out of Glennon.
Oh, I don't know about that. I kind of like the way Glennon played, as bad as his receiving core was. But I'm with you. I think that's a fine defense to play at home. If you're playing on FanDuel and you want to know what kickers to play, I will never mention the name of a kicker. I will just give you this canned response. But it's literally how I pick kickers on FanDuel each week. I just start from the cheapest kickers at the bottom, and I look at implied point total. It's something I tweet out every week. You follow me at Scott Barrett DFB, and just kind of look around, and as the prices climb with implied point total, just try and spot the values. Sometimes there'll be a team that ranks top 6 in implied point total, but their kicker's minimum price or near minimum priced. Then I'll just try and load up on those guys. Graham Gano was an example of that, who I think did pretty well for me if I recall correctly. But yeah, when playing kickers, try and grab someone as cheap as possible, and you want guys on teams that rank highly in implied point total, likely to score a lot of points.
Yeah, I don't have too much more to add on kickers. Guys I'm interested in this week, though, are both playing at home, and on teams that we mentioned, we liked Cairo Santos for the Kansas City Chiefs and Younghoe Koo for the Chargers. I'm into both those guys.
No, you just wanted to say Younghoe Koo.
I did. You caught me. But I will probably be playing him on cash and FanDuel.
Ladies and gentlemen, this has been the Chalk Talk Podcast. I am Scott Barrett. You can follow me on Twitter at Scott Barrett DFB. And Tyler, tell the folks at home where they can find you.
You can find me on Twitter at Tyler Buecher, Buecher.
All right. Good luck this week, guys, and thank you, as always, for tuning in. We appreciate it.